Thank you, Bryn. As Bryn mentioned, I am the librarian for the St. John area for Horizon Health Network. I'm a baby librarian. I started just shy of 2 years ago now, so I'm still learning every day, and I expect to until I retire. But I want to thank Bryn and the Research Services Department for opening up a slot in their Explore series for me to participate as a guest presenter. This presentation is on being a conscientious researcher. So welcome to Jiminy Critic, what goes into being a conscientious researcher. And as Bryn mentioned, today we're going to be looking at both journal appraisals and article appraisals. So we're going to look at appraising where the research is coming from that you're interested in using, and the research and the articles itself. So to start off, where you search is important. This little graph comes from the Association of College and Research Libraries. And the content is important, but what I want you to get from it right now is that there's a sliding scale and a lot of gray zones between open access and closed access. So the articles and the research that's behind paywalls, or the content that for some reason isn't freely and readily available to you. So they broke down these components into reader rights, reuse rights, copyright, author posting rights, automatic posting, and machine readability. So in short, there are the content usage rights, and then what is accessible. And I highly recommend you go through and read this information. I'll make sure that all of the resources I used in this presentation will be available to you so you can reference later on, because there are some slides like this that are more for visual representation versus content, even though the content is important. So, heading on to appraising the journal. A key question that I think is overlooked and people need to keep in the back of their mind is what needs to be considered when you're looking at the source of the content you want to use. So this leads us to, there are lots of components, but there are also tools to help you figure out what is a legitimate and valid and quality resource, and what should be either used with a healthy dose of skepticism and a big jar of salt, or maybe not used at all. And these points come from, again, the Association of College and Research Libraries website. They have a great toolkit that looks at appraising journals, and I broke down their points into 3 topics. So they basically fall into a category of the people, the journal, and finances. So for the people, these are for peer review. So are other researchers involved in the research that the journal is publishing? Is the research being peer-reviewed? Is it being critically and analytically questioned? And is it going through rigorous processes by people in the field who know what they're talking about. The governing body and the editorial team of the journal should be known in the field. They should be recognizable names. The research that they themselves put out should be of quality, and they should be maintaining high standards and work ethics. Conflicts of interest are either disclosed and or irrelevant because it's not an issue. And also, how are the conflicts of interest managed? Vetting of articles is listed on the website as the identification of and dealing with allegations of research misconduct. So this is where publishers and editors take reasonable steps to ID and prevent the publication of papers where research misconduct has occurred. And in a situation where misconduct has been brought forward, there's a clear process in place to deal with such allegations. Moving on to the journal, is the copyright policy clearly stated? So as the author, you know how you can use your original research in the future and how the journal is handling the copyright. The owner and management of the journal, that should be clear, and you should be able to identify who owns and manages the journal that you're looking at. The name of the journal should be unique and easily identified, so it shouldn't be confused with other journals out there, and it shouldn't be a journal that is piggybacking off of a more well-known title. So if you come across two that are very similar, and one is Nature and the other is the Journal of Nature, or there's the journal in one and not the other, or the Annals of something and not the other, then you should probably investigate both. For the website content should be accurate and reflective of the journal content. It should also be very professional. It should have the information about the people involved, the editor, anyone, if it's an open peer review process, who has done peer reviews in the past, how the peer review process is managed, that kind of thing. And access. So it should be very clear to you as to how the articles are accessed. And this feeds into the publishing schedule and the archival process. So how often is the journal publishing? What is the publishing process? Is there a lag time? Is there a lead time? Is there an embargo for when your article will be available? And how is the article going to be accessed when it becomes, when it ends up being in a previous issue? So for the archive, will the previous issues be available? Is your article going to be indexed and easy to find? For advertising, the website for the journal should clearly state that the policy for advertising, so what kind of ads are going to be included, who's the target audience, and who makes the decisions for what makes it into the journal. That leads us into finances. So we have the author fees. Those should be clearly stated and broken down to understand why you're being charged, what you're being charged. Revenue sources can include the business model that the journal adopts. And direct marketing is in regards to soliciting of manuscripts and making sure that that's conducted on behalf of the journal in appropriate and well-targeted and unobtrusive ways. So now we're heading off to a journal assessment tool by Carl. And Carl is the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. And this is a fantastic PDF. I highly recommend printing it off and sticking it to your corkboard. The big box says key things to consider when assessing a journal. And they include things like don't trust unsolicited emails, review several issues of the journal, review the journal website, and it should contain, like you mentioned before, a clear, appropriate scope, editorial board with a recognized expert, and transparent information about the article processing charges if they're going to be applied. We're going to get to the impact metric. I have a few caveats about that. But then they go on and say, if you're still unsure, check with your peers and your colleagues to see what resources, so what journals they trust, and especially if you're new in your field, who are some of the big names to make sure that you watch out for. And your library is just around the corner. In some cases, just down the hall. And definitely make use of the libraries or whatever institutions you're affiliated with. So if you are affiliated with the university, you have the hospital librarians and the academic librarians. And I have a few comments at the end of the presentation about the research web that is in place for you. You can also visit thinkchecksubmit.org, and that is coming up, which is a great resource with a brief checklist to go through. They also include neutral factors, and these include the lack of impact metrics. Like I said, I will discuss impact metrics coming up. Geographical location shouldn't affect your decision making because journals are created and based all over the world. So just because it's located somewhere doesn't mean it's good or bad. And article processing charges, depending on the business model, those may fluctuate and it may differ from journal to journal. So just because researchers are being charged doesn't necessarily mean that it's a red flag. And representation of other journals by the same publisher. So publishers can very easily end up with a full spectrum of journals. They may have a gold standard journal for your field on one end, and then something that is at the very best questionable, but more likely quite nefarious. So it's certainly important to do your due diligence and not take the reputation of the publisher as an indication of the journals that they publish. So now we're heading into another appraisal tool, and this is Think, Check, Submit. And this is a really great, quick tool to help you decide when you're at the point of you're ready to publish, where you want to go. And it's just to help you get a sense of what you need to look out for and make sure you feel comfortable and confident in your chosen journal. So the little bird means that they are on Twitter. So if you are on social media, I highly recommend following their feeds and stay up to date with what's going on with them. So for the think component, the two main questions are you submitting to a trusted journal and is it the right journal for your work? Then you get into check, and they have questions like, do you or your colleagues know the journal? Have you read any articles from the journal? Is it easy to discover the latest papers in the journal? Can you easily identify and contact the publisher? Is the publisher's name clearly displayed on the journal website? So a lot of these questions are questions that support the previous slide and just help you critically evaluate the journal with some targeted questions to think about. And when you get to the point that you feel like you're ready to submit, this is usually a good sign when you can answer yes to some or all of the questions in the check section. So it wants to make sure that you feel confident and comfortable with your decision. And two key points is that your paper should be indexed and archived so it's easily discoverable. And you should expect a professional publishing experience when your work is being reviewed and edited. Now on to the caveat for the journal impact factor. What do you have to keep in mind? All these things. So, front matter count. Front matter is things that the journal publishes, such as editorials, letters to the editors, news, and obituaries. So these all count to the JIF if researchers cite them. And the more front matter a journal publishes, it's likely the higher the JIF will be. Citation windows, the gold standard for publishers and for scholars is 2 years. And 2 years for a lot of the specialties in a lot of areas is not a long time. For example, biomedical research papers, on average, gain approximately 50% of their citations in about 8 years. So that's 6 years outside of the citation window. And for psychology and social sciences, they both have lead times of 13 plus years. So when you know that, it definitely does put impact factors into question because they're only looking at the 2 years. And a journal impact factor is the average of citations the paper published in the previous 2 years received. So impact factors can also be driven by unbalanced articles. Just as in research, there are outliers. There's one giant paper that comes out and it gets all the citations for that year. So it's going to drive its journal's impact factor up just by sheer volume of citations. And it was said that about 70% of papers are, I think it was 2016, that didn't have, that fell below the number of citations for the impact factors. So, so a few papers can make a big difference. For interdisciplinary, like I mentioned with the citation windows, it's not fair to cross-compare impact factors numbers when the impact factor numbers can vary so drastically. And there are a lot of mitigating factors that go into deciding these numbers. So if you want to be fair, impact factor numbers should really only be compared within that specialty. And overall inflation of factor numbers, inflation happens everywhere. I was not aware that numbers inflate. here as well, but they do. So, for example, in 1975, the Journal of Experimental Medicine was the top scoring one with a JIF of 11.874. And in 2016, a cancer journal for clinicians had the highest score of 187.040. So contributing factors for this inflation can include the increased number of scholarly journals and the increased number of references per paper. So this inflation is a reflection of growth in quantity, not necessarily a growth in quality. So now that you've gone through all of that, you have a great selection of articles you're confident in using. Are they any good? So now we are going to appraise the research. So we have 8 steps. The steps may vary. The resource I took this from actually had 10. I took out the one that addressed the impact factor metric and the one that said if all else fails, Google to see if you can find a reputable paper to refute the paper that you're questioning. But for the ones that I chose, it should be common sense to read the article yourself. It's great to base the research question on a sensational headline. You know, if something grabs your attention, you want to learn more, great. But don't go the other way around. And if there's a paper that grabs your attention and it's also hot news, definitely read the original research. Don't rely on titles and abstracts alone. Abstracts and titles can be misleading, and they can also misrepresent the findings. So you don't get the details of how the study was conducted or how the data were analyzed. It's a very small snippet and a very condensed amount of space. So, of course, researchers, by that very nature of the construct, have to cherry pick from their article. The interpretation presented in the abstract may not actually be correct. So you have to do your due diligence and read the article yourself to make your own decisions and conclusions. Acquire background knowledge. So if something comes up and you're not familiar with it, read up on it. You know, you can go into the gray literature. So even something like, you know, a professional association or a medical dictionary. I won't say no to going to Wikipedia and checking their references, and if there's a reference that seems like it's high quality, I can go through that way. So be open to where you can get additional resources. Just be very critical of the resources that you use when you go into gray literature. And that brings us to the quality of article and the journal. So this includes non-peer-reviewed material. So make sure that the quality is up to professional standards. And if it's non-peer-reviewed, definitely question your source. For author expertise and conflict of interest, we covered that before when looking at journals. And study design, execution, and analysis. Look at things like sample size, the representative samples used, control group, were they used, was blind testing included, and were selective reporting data biases present, or were they objective and included the good, bad, and ugly. For consistency with other research, look for explanations as to why the study got different results, if it did. Do they address the results, gloss over the results, or do they ignore them completely? Look at their cited articles. Introduction and discussion sections should both be very citation heavy with high quality articles. And if you know that there's a seminal work in that field or a gold standard or a pillar of that research, then definitely keep your eye out for that. Then we have standard conventions of scientific writing. So the bare bones of the paper. Scientific writing should be generally objective and passionate. It should focus on facts rather than emotions, and it should sound like it's passionate analysis. So they're presenting their findings very clinically and without agenda, because this is what they found, this is what the facts told them, this is what the data indicates, versus an impassioned argument. So they should not be selling you on their conclusions. Now the next few slides are snippets from assessment tools. This is from Duke University, and like I said, the resources will be available to you. Look through them. But Duke University has quite a few worksheets that can be applied to very specific things that you need to appraise. So here we have therapy, they have practice guidelines, screening, differential diagnosis, and then clinical decision analysis. So these are just a few, and then they go on, and they have specific study types that they provide worksheets for as well. The worksheets will give you a breakdown of what you have to look for and what you need to critically evaluate before making your final decision. And here we have another appraisal tool from the University of South Australia, and this one is like the one for Duke University. It has the study type. So you can go through, and if you're looking for case control studies, then click on number 4, and they will have a worksheet for you that you can work through to evaluate your resources. Retraction Watch is also on Twitter, so definitely follow their feed because they are a great resource that is constantly looking at and for retracted articles or studies and trials that for some reason there's been misconduct or there's been something that that negates the quality and the integrity of the study, the process, or the results. There was one recently that the lab assistant was given a lifetime ban by the I think it was the National Library of Medicine down the state because she manipulated tests to improve the amount of grant money that they at the university. So, so it's not just papers that they look out for. They also look out for active studies. And this brings us to journal clubs. So practice makes perfect. Definitely, if you're able to participate in a journal club, If you're a go-getter, round up some of your colleagues and tell them it's a great way to spend half hour, 45 minutes, your lunch hour, discussing a paper. And you can use journal clubs to practice your appraisal skills for the journal itself or for articles, or a combination of both. And it's also a great way to delve into your field and become more aware of the names that are real keystone contributors to that body of knowledge. And so how can we help? So this is the web I alluded to earlier. It's comprised of Horizon, UNP and Endel, and then the Maritime for Support Unit. So we all do very similar things in different capacities. I work, and the librarians here at Horizon work with pretty much anyone except the general public. So we don't work directly with patients, the families, or the public, but we are here for the clinicians, therapists, researchers, students, in different capacities, and administration and management. The universities are ideally suited to work with the students because we have very limited capacity as hospital librarians. And then the MSSU is a fantastic organization. They work in the Maritime for pretty much anyone who's engaged in patient-oriented research and implementation. The main thing about the Maritime for Support Unit is that they can take on larger projects than the hospital librarian could do. And I'm sure the academic librarians are in the middle somewhere on that spectrum. So the MSSU has the resources and are able to help with things like systematic reviews and the larger, more time-heavy projects. So that is it for my little presentation. You can feel free to contact me, please do. Like I said, I am just down the hall. I'm actually right across the hall. So now you know where I am. And my email is the General Horizon issue, and then my phone number